In the vast, unbroken expanse of time, the story of humanity begins not with triumph but with improbability. Homo sapiens, the species that now commands continents, oceans, and skies, emerged in a world that seemed utterly indifferent to our survival. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat of our ancestors was a negotiation with forces far larger and more powerful than themselves. The earth they inherited was not a gentle cradle but a relentless crucible, volcanic eruptions that could blacken skies for years, ice sheets that pressed like stone across continents, predators that lurked in every shadow, and pathogens whose tiny, invisible forms could annihilate entire clans. Against such odds, one species, fragile and unremarkable by the standards of nature, would endure. The story of this endurance begins with the simple recognition that survival was never guaranteed. Imagine the first humans standing on the open savanna, the tall grasses rippling under an unforgiving sun. Every day, survival demanded a profound combination of awareness, instinct, and imagination. The scent of predators in the wind was as vital as the scent of water or ripe fruit. To misjudge either could mean death. The very bodies of these early humans were imperfect instruments for survival. They lacked the speed of antelopes, the strength of predators, the claws, the fangs, or the natural armor that so many other creatures relied upon. Yet they possessed something subtler, more malleable, the capacity to think, to anticipate, to remember, and to imagine. These intangible traits, invisible to the eye, would become the tools with which humans not only survived but began to dominate. Even the environment seemed aligned against them. Africa, the cradle of humanity, was a land of extremes. Seasons swung from torrential rains to crushing droughts. Forests and deserts encroached and receded unpredictably. Water sources could vanish within weeks, leaving life clinging to survival by the thinnest of threads. Yet, paradoxically, it was this very unpredictability that shaped the cognitive architecture of Homo sapiens. To survive, they had to learn not just where to find food and water, but when, how, and why. They had to track migrating herds across vast distances, anticipate the moods of rivers, the movements of clouds, the patterns of the sun and stars. In doing so, they began to see the world not as a static place but as a story, one filled with cause and effect, consequence, and pattern. Survival demanded cooperation. Alone, a human was a fragile creature, ill-equipped to challenge the larger forces of nature. In groups, however, they became something altogether different. Families and clans formed networks of vigilance and support, each individual contributing knowledge, skill, and protection. Early humans shared not only food but information, the location of a hidden spring, the behavior of predators, the timing of seasonal migrations. Language, still in its nascent form, emerged as a lifeline. With sounds, gestures, and eventually words, humans could transmit warnings, instructions, and stories that transcended immediate experience. A young hunter could learn the secrets of tracking without ever having faced a lion. A child could internalize the wisdom of generations, carried not in bones or blood but in the rhythm of speech and gesture. This was the beginning of a species not merely surviving, but surviving together. Yet even in cooperation, vulnerability was constant. Predators did not negotiate. Droughts did not reason. Disease did not distinguish between the strong and the weak. And humans, small and slow, faced extinction at almost every turn. Fossil records hint at populations collapsing, at lineages disappearing in silence. Genetic bottlenecks suggest that, at times, only a few thousand humans walked the earth, balancing on a knife's edge between life and oblivion. In these precarious moments, the difference between survival and extinction often came down to imagination, the ability to foresee danger, to innovate tools, to alter behavior in ways that defied immediate instinct. Fire, simple yet revolutionary, would become one of the earliest manifestations of this imagination. Clothing, shelters, coordinated hunts, all were born from the need to bridge the gap between fragile flesh and the merciless world. Amid this precarious existence, humans began to notice patterns beyond mere survival. They observed the movement of the sun, the phases of the moon, the changing of the seasons. These patterns were not only practical guides but seeds of wonder. They provoked the first questions about cause and consequence, about the hidden rhythms of life and death, about the meaning of being small in a vast, ancient world. Curiosity became a survival mechanism. Those who asked questions, who explored beyond the familiar, who experimented with new tools or new methods of hunting, often lived to pass on their knowledge. Those who did not were lost, their stories ending in the quiet erasure of oblivion. And so, the fragility of early humans was inseparable from the very qualities that would define their eventual mastery. In a sense, the species that should not have survived did so precisely because it was vulnerable, flexible, and imaginative. Every failure became a lesson, every narrow escape reinforced patterns of learning, cooperation, and foresight. The Earth was an adversary, yet it was also a teacher, shaping bodies, minds, and cultures through relentless trial and error. Human history, in its earliest chapters, is not a record of domination but a chronicle of improbable persistence, a testament to resilience written in the small victories of everyday survival. The spark of Homo sapiens survival lies not in brute strength or predestined superiority, but in a subtle alchemy of cognition, sociality, and imagination. Against towering predators, harsh climates, and the ceaseless randomness of existence, they endured. And as they endured, they began to tell stories, of hunts, of danger, of triumph and loss. These stories carried not just knowledge, but identity, community, and hope. They were the earliest maps of the human mind, pathways through which experience could be remembered, shared, and transformed. It is this delicate, improbable spark, the capacity to imagine, to share, to learn, that sets Homo sapiens apart. The species that should not have survived did survive, not through inevitability, but through ingenuity, cooperation, and a relentless curiosity about the world and their place within it. The story of humanity, as it begins here, is a story of persistence against all odds, of life clinging to life, of a fragile species discovering that its greatest power was the power to imagine the world as it might be. And from this fragile beginning, everything that follows, the stories, the civilizations, the art, the science, the myths, would emerge. The improbable had survived, and the narrative of the earth would never be the same again. Long before Homo sapiens set foot beyond Africa, the earth was a theater of giants, a world dominated by creatures so immense and powerful that survival for a small, fragile species seemed impossible. Imagine a landscape where towering mammoths shook the ground with each step, their curved tusks glinting under a sun that bore down mercilessly on endless plains. Saber-toothed cats crouched in shadowy forests, their fangs capable of tearing through the thickest hide, while herds of giant ground sloths moved with a deliberate, almost indifferent grace. Rivers swelled unpredictably, and mountains loomed like sleeping titans, their icy peaks harboring storms that could wipe out entire populations in a matter of hours. It was a world that demanded respect, cunning, and relentless vigilance, yet it was also a world of breathtaking beauty and wonder, one that would shape the minds of those who could survive it. The Pleistocene epoch, stretching across hundreds of thousands of years, was a period of extreme contrasts. Ice sheets advanced and retreated across continents, transforming fertile valleys into frozen deserts and back again. Savannas gave way to dense forests, forests to marshes, and marshes to barren tundra. Climate did not simply fluctuate, it surged and recoiled with a power that reshaped the very face of the earth. Rivers, sometimes placid and sometimes torrential, could carve landscapes overnight. Volcanoes erupted with little warning, painting the skies with ash and altering seasons for years. Every environmental shift carried the weight of life or death. In this unforgiving world, a species as small and unarmored as Homo sapiens might have seemed insignificant, yet the seeds of resilience were quietly taking root. Predators of every scale dominated the land. Lions, larger than those of today, prowled in packs, coordinating their hunts with terrifying efficiency. Wolves, hyenas, and other carnivores stalked silently, capable of bringing down prey far larger than themselves. And yet, for all their strength, these predators were bound to instinct and circumstance. Human ancestors, though lacking claws and fangs, were armed with an entirely different set of tools: observation, creativity, and cooperation. By learning the habits of predators, by predicting their behavior and avoiding direct confrontation, early humans turned the raw threat of nature into a landscape of opportunity. They learned not only to survive alongside these giants but, in subtle ways, to outthink them. The flora of this ancient world was equally formidable. Dense forests concealed predators and poisonous plants alike, while deserts tested the limits of endurance. Rivers could provide life-giving water one season and vanish the next. Fruits and tubers ripened. In short, unpredictable windows, requiring humans to master timing, observation, and memory. Every meal was a calculated risk, every decision about where to move, when to forage, and how to avoid danger demanded mental acuity. In these conditions, survival was not a matter of brute strength but of adaptability, foresight, and understanding the intricate patterns of the natural world. Water, the most essential resource, could be as perilous as any predator. Seasonal floods could sweep away camps in minutes, while droughts could turn lush plains into dust-choked deserts. Humans learned to read the land: traces of animal tracks leading to hidden springs, the behavior of birds signaling rain, or the appearance of certain plants indicating fertile soil. This knowledge, painstakingly accumulated over generations, became an invisible armor, a buffer against the capriciousness of nature. Survival required not only endurance but intelligence, observation, and memory, qualities that Homo sapiens were beginning to cultivate more keenly than any other species around them. Against this backdrop of immense life and volatile environment, early humans were remarkably small. Adult males might have weighed little more than 50 to 60 kilograms, and their strength, though considerable relative to their size, was no match for the giants that roamed the land. Their bodies were lean, adapted for endurance and heat regulation rather than combat or raw power. Yet it was precisely this vulnerability that forced innovation. Humans could not rely on strength alone, so they relied on each other, creating networks of cooperation, sharing resources, and dividing labor. In these social bonds, they discovered an extraordinary form of survival, the power of collective intelligence, where the knowledge of one could benefit the many. The Pleistocene world was also defined by unpredictability. Earthquakes split the ground without warning, volcanic eruptions could darken skies for months, storms could surge through valleys, sweeping away everything in their path. In such a world, even the most prepared group could find themselves on the brink of extinction. It was not a gentle environment, and it was not forgiving. Every generation faced the possibility of annihilation. And yet, Homo sapiens endured. They endured not because the odds were favorable, but because they learned to navigate uncertainty with imagination and strategy. They became not only observers of the natural world but participants in it, using insight and creativity as survival tools. In the shadow of the giants, early humans also began to cultivate awe. The sight of a mammoth herd moving across a plain, the roar of a distant predator, the sudden eruption of a volcano, all these phenomena shaped perception, emotion, and cognition. Fear, yes, but also curiosity. Wonder at the sheer scale and beauty of the world. This duality, vulnerability paired with fascination, laid the foundation for a cognitive leap. Humans began to see patterns where others saw chaos, to construct mental maps of terrain, climate, and behavior that transcended immediate survival. Their minds were evolving not only to endure but to interpret, imagine, and ultimately narrate the world around them. In this era of giants and extremes, every day was a negotiation with life and death. Yet it was also a world of opportunity, where the smallest misstep could mean death, but the smallest insight could secure survival. Humans were learning to exploit niches, adapt behaviors, and outmaneuver threats through planning, communication, and innovation. It was a delicate, improbable balance, a dance with forces far larger than themselves. And through it all, the earth was teaching lessons not written in books but in the rhythms of wind, water, and wild. It is within this world of majesty and menace that Homo sapiens first began to assert their presence. Small, fragile, and unremarkable in appearance, they were nonetheless capable of observing, imagining, and learning in ways no other species could match. Survival was not guaranteed, yet they persisted, finding patterns, mastering tools, and forming social bonds that would lay the groundwork for everything to come. In the shadows of giants, humans were quietly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to define the very nature of their species, vulnerable yet adaptable, fragile yet resilient, small yet capable of reshaping the world through ingenuity and imagination. The emergence of Homo sapiens in the cradle of Africa was a moment of quiet improbability, a flicker of life that would, against all odds, grow to illuminate the entire globe. Fossil evidence and genetic traces tell us that around 300,000 years ago, a new species appeared, one small, fragile, and seemingly insignificant, yet destined to outlast giants, rivals, and catastrophes. The early humans of this era were physically similar to their contemporaries in many ways, yet subtly distinct. Their skulls hinted at a growing brain capacity, a structure designed for memory, pattern recognition, and imagination. Their hands were precise and dexterous, capable of crafting tools, fashioning objects, and manipulating the world in ways no other species could. In every detail of anatomy, evolution was quietly preparing them for a journey that would stretch across continents and millennia. These first Homo sapiens were not the apex predators of their ecosystems, they were, in many ways, vulnerable observers, small creatures in a vast and dangerous world. Their survival relied on intelligence, observation, and cooperation. They had to learn the behaviors of predators larger and faster than themselves, the rhythms of the land, the migration patterns of prey, and the changing seasons. Every decision carried weight. A miscalculation could mean death by lion, starvation during a dry season, or exposure to the elements. Yet in these challenges, they discovered the extraordinary potential of their species, the capacity not just to survive, but to innovate, to manipulate, and to anticipate. The early Homo sapiens were hunters and gatherers, yes, but their survival depended on much more than raw skill. They needed knowledge passed from one generation to the next, the kind of insight that could not be learned in a single lifetime. They began to communicate in ways that transcended instinct, to share lessons about which plants were edible, which waters were safe, and how predators could be avoided or outwitted. Language, in its earliest form, emerged as a critical tool, allowing groups to coordinate, teach, and warn. Words and gestures became lifelines, bridges between individuals and across generations. In the soft murmur of shared information, humans discovered a power unlike any other on Earth, the ability to transfer wisdom, memory, and foresight. Yet physical vulnerability persisted. Early humans were slower than the herbivores they hunted and weaker than the predators that stalked them. Their survival was never guaranteed. They compensated through ingenuity. Stone tools, simple yet revolutionary, allowed them to process food, defend themselves, and manipulate their environment. Fire, mastered perhaps tens of thousands of years later, would eventually provide warmth, protection, and a means to cook food, expanding both nutrition and safety. Each discovery, each incremental advantage, was a lifeline cast into the storm of survival. Every tool was a testament to the species' ability to turn imagination into reality, to craft survival from thought and ingenuity. Environmental pressures were relentless. Africa, their birthplace, was a land of extremes. Rainfall could flood entire regions or vanish for years. Forests expanded and contracted unpredictably, deserts encroached, and rivers swelled or dried without warning. Early humans had to be observers of subtle signals, the flight patterns of birds indicating water nearby, the scent of the soil predicting the coming rains, or the traces of animal tracks pointing to fresh game. In these delicate observations, the seeds of cognition were planted. The world was not simply to be endured, it was to be read, interpreted, and anticipated. Pattern recognition and foresight became not just survival mechanisms, but hallmarks of a species on the brink of remarkable change. Physical differences from other hominins were subtle yet consequential. Compared with Neanderthals, Homo sapiens were smaller, lighter, and less robust, with bodies adapted for endurance over short-term strength. Yet this apparent fragility concealed a hidden advantage: flexibility. A lighter frame meant greater mobility, the ability to traverse longer distances in search of food and water, and an increased capacity for social cooperation. Strength alone was no guarantee of survival in a world defined by unpredictability, but intelligence, foresight, and social cohesion offered a different kind of resilience, one that would prove decisive in the long arc of evolution. Social structures emerged as a foundation for survival. Early humans were not solitary wanderers, they moved in small, cooperative bands. Families and extended groups pooled knowledge, divided tasks, and shared resources. The bonds between individuals became as essential as the tools they carried. Cooperation allowed humans to tackle challenges far greater than any individual could face alone: coordinated hunting, child rearing, defense against predators, and knowledge preservation. In these intimate networks, humans discovered a profound truth: survival was not an individual endeavor, but a collective achievement. Cognition and imagination intertwined in ways that would define the species. Early humans began to see beyond immediate needs, to anticipate events, and to innovate solutions to complex problems. They observed the world not as a series of threats, but as a system of cause and effect. They imagined outcomes, crafted strategies, and shared these ideas with one another. The mind of Homo sapiens was evolving into a tool as sharp as any stone blade, capable of mapping the environment, predicting danger, and creating survival strategies that extended beyond instinct. In these formative millennia, humans also began to cultivate curiosity and reflection. They noticed patterns in the stars, the seasons, and the behavior of animals. They questioned, in nascent ways, their place in the world and the meaning of their struggles. This combination of survival and reflection, observation and imagination, would become the foundation of the species' unique story. Every narrow escape from predator or famine reinforced knowledge, social cohesion, and the drive to innovate, laying the groundwork for a species capable of reshaping not only its immediate environment but the entire planet. Homo sapiens emerged into a world of giants and danger not as conquerors, but as careful, observant, and adaptable participants. Their bodies may have been fragile, but their minds were formidable. Every decision, every shared observation, every innovation increased their odds against extinction. Against landscapes filled with towering predators, extreme climates, and rival hominins, they persisted. They endured, not because the odds were favorable, but because they could think, learn, imagine, and cooperate. In these early centuries, the improbable became possible, and the story of the species that should not have survived quietly began to unfold. In the labyrinth of human evolution, the story of Homo sapiens is framed by the silent, invisible markers of extinction. Across the vast stretches of time, countless species of hominins once walked the earth, their footprints fading into the soil like whispers of lives lived and lost. Most, like the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, never made it into the present. They vanished not with the crash of a single, cataclysmic event, but in the quiet, steady erosion of time and circumstance. Their stories, like fragments of forgotten memories, have been unearthed in bones and genes, fragments that tell of close calls, bitter competition, and missed opportunities. And yet, amidst all the collapse, one species, Homo sapiens, emerged victorious, not because the odds favored it, but because it somehow defied them. For much of prehistory, Homo sapiens coexisted with other hominin species. Neanderthals, the closest relatives to modern humans, were a robust and powerful group, adapted to the harsh climates of Ice Age Europe. They were not just survivors, they were adept hunters, resourceful, and capable of creating tools, shelters, and even art. In many ways, Neanderthals seemed destined to endure. But survival was never as simple as strength or intelligence. It was, instead, a delicate balance of factors: resources, climate, competition, and sometimes, pure luck. And in this balance, Homo sapiens found a way to tip the scales in its favor. The Neanderthals, for all their strength, were not as flexible as Homo sapiens. They had evolved to thrive in a specific environment, their bodies designed for short bursts of intense activity and survival in cold, harsh conditions. But as the climate fluctuated, as ecosystems changed with the ebb and flow of ice sheets, they struggled to adapt. Homo sapiens, by contrast, had a remarkable ability to innovate and adjust. The sapiens' greater social flexibility, their capacity for long-range planning, and their advanced tools made them formidable competitors. They could collaborate over vast distances, share knowledge, and adapt to different environments with a speed that Neanderthals could not match. This made all the difference. The first encounters between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals would have been marked by uncertainty and tension. These were two species sharing the same space, competing for the same resources. For Homo sapiens, the Neanderthals represented both a threat and a reflection of what could happen to their own kind. Would they too fall victim to extinction? Or could they somehow carve out a future where they thrived, where their survival was not just a matter of chance, but of choice? The answer, as history would unfold, lay in their ability to innovate, cooperate, and tell stories. While Homo sapiens developed more advanced hunting tools and methods, there was also something more subtle at play: storytelling. The power to convey information, to pass on lessons and strategies, became a game changer. Neanderthals, though intelligent and capable, did not seem to possess the same level of symbolic thinking or cultural expression. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, began to craft tools, speak in increasingly complex ways, and form intricate social bonds. They created stories, not just to remember where the best hunting grounds were or how to avoid a predator, but to make sense of the world around them, to form identity and meaning. In this, Homo sapiens discovered the power of narrative, a tool as important for survival as fire or flint. Competition for resources also played a central role in the fate of these species. As climate patterns shifted, humans moved out of Africa, encountering new territories and rival species. The environmental challenges were immense. The ice sheets moved like relentless giants, altering landscapes and pushing human populations into new, often hostile territories. Homo sapiens, with their capacity for adaptation and cooperation, found ways to make these changes work in their favor. Meanwhile, Neanderthals struggled with the environmental shifts, and other hominins, like the Denisovans, vanished as well. Homo sapiens had the social structures and cognitive flexibility to not only adapt to these challenges but to overcome them. Yet it was not just the strength of Homo sapiens that allowed them to survive, it was their ability to innovate under pressure. Early humans didn't merely survive, they transformed the very environment in which they lived. They learned how to create tools from bone, stone, and later, metal. They discovered how to cook food, how to navigate across vast distances, and how to tame fire. These innovations gave them a level of control over the environment that other species lacked. They also gave Homo sapiens a sense of agency, a belief that they could shape the world around them, not merely endure it. The extinction of the Neanderthals and other hominin species was not a sudden event, but a gradual process. It wasn't a battle fought with weapons or armies but with the quiet, inexorable force of adaptation. Homo sapiens survived not because they were superior in any single trait, but because they excelled in the combination of intellect, social cooperation, and innovation. The Neanderthals, despite their strength, could not keep up with the pace of change. They could not outpace the transformations in climate, nor the competition for resources. Slowly, over thousands of years, they faded from the earth, their genes leaving traces in the modern human genome but their culture, their way of life, gone. In this crucible of competition, the story of Homo sapiens unfolds not as a tale of conquest, but as a story of persistence, of improbability. Every small advantage, every new tool, every story shared became part of the intricate web that allowed them to endure. They were not the strongest species, nor the most suited to their environment in any traditional sense, but they were the most adaptable. In the end, it was this adaptability, this ability to learn, to teach, to innovate, that allowed Homo sapiens to become the last hominin standing. As the shadows of extinction swept across the land, Homo sapiens moved forward, not just surviving but thriving. Their victory was not one of domination but of quiet resilience, of a species that should never have survived, but did, by learning, adapting, and most importantly, telling the stories that shaped their world. The first stories that Homo sapiens told were not carved into stone or etched onto walls, but shared in whispers around fires, passed down through the generations in the soft cadence of voices and the crackling warmth of flame. These were not tales of gods or heroes, not yet, but stories of survival. The wind in the trees, the howl of the distant predator, the shifting seasons, all were woven into the fabric of human existence, transforming raw experience into meaning. These early stories were maps of survival, guides to a world filled with danger and uncertainty. They became the thread that connected generations, linking the past with the present, and the present with the future. In the act of storytelling, humans began to chart not just their physical journey, but their emotional and intellectual landscapes as well. In a world defined by threats, be they predators, droughts, or disease, survival was about more than just brute strength. It was about understanding patterns, anticipating danger, and sharing knowledge. Stories became a tool of memory, a way of passing on critical information that could mean the difference between life and death. Beware the cliffs near the riverbank, a mother might whisper to her child, or, the rains will come when the crow calls 3 times. These stories were more than just words, they were survival strategies encoded in language. They carried the wisdom of ancestors, the distilled knowledge of lifetimes. And in a world where the future was never certain, the act of remembering became a profound form of security. Language, though still in its earliest stages, was the key that unlocked the potential for this storytelling. It was a remarkable adaptation, one that set Homo sapiens apart from every other species on Earth. Through language, humans could communicate not just immediate needs but abstract concepts, desires, and fears. They could talk about things that were not present, things that had happened before, or things that might happen in the future. This capacity for abstraction, this ability to communicate across time and space, was the first step toward building complex societies, and more importantly, it was the first step toward creating the myths, legends, and histories that would define human culture. The power of storytelling lay not just in its ability to convey practical knowledge, but in its ability to build a shared identity. As early humans came together in groups, they began to share not just knowledge of where to find food or how to avoid danger, but also stories about who they were and where they came from. These narratives gave structure to their world, offering a sense of continuity in a time of constant change. They told stories of ancestors who had triumphed over the elements or of animals who had once been gods. They shared myths about the stars, explaining why the moon waxed and waned, or why the sun rose each day. These stories offered a sense of order in a chaotic world. They created a space for humans to reflect on their place in the universe, to explore their hopes, their fears, and their dreams. As Homo sapiens' cognitive abilities grew more sophisticated, so too did the complexity of their stories. Over time, storytelling began to shift from practical survival guides to more philosophical musings. Humans began to ask the big questions: why are we here? What is the meaning of life? What happens after we die? These questions were not just theoretical. They were born from the intimate experience of mortality, of watching loved ones age and die, of seeing the land change around them, of feeling the passage of time like a weight on their shoulders. Storytelling became the way that Homo sapiens began to process these mysteries. It was how they made sense of loss, suffering, and joy. It was how they found meaning in a world that could seem at once beautiful and cruel. The power of these stories extended beyond the personal. They helped bind communities together, giving people a shared sense of purpose. Stories of the hunt, of survival against the odds, of triumph over adversity, these were the stories that brought early human groups closer. They were stories that built trust, that established norms and values, that created cohesion among people who might otherwise have been strangers. In a world where every day could be a struggle for survival, the act of sharing stories provided a sense of solidarity, a way to connect emotionally and intellectually. Through storytelling, humans were able to create bonds that were stronger than blood, stronger than geography. These bonds would lay the foundation for the complex societies that would eventually emerge. But storytelling also had a darker side. As societies grew more complex, stories began to be used to control and manipulate. Leaders could weave narratives to justify their power, to maintain order, or to instill fear. Gods were created to explain the mysteries of life and death, and heroes were celebrated to give people something to aspire to. These stories served to reinforce social hierarchies, to delineate us from them, to create in-groups and out-groups. And yet, even as storytelling began to serve the interests of power, it also provided the means for subversion and rebellion. The same stories that could be used to control could also be used to challenge, to question, to resist. The evolution of storytelling, from simple survival guides to complex myths and philosophical explorations, marked a turning point in the development of Homo sapiens. It was in the telling of stories that humans first discovered their power, not just over nature, but over themselves. The ability to narrate one's life, to create meaning from chaos, is what allowed Homo sapiens to transcend mere survival and begin to create culture. Through storytelling, humans could envision a world beyond the immediate, a world shaped not just by the forces of nature but by human will and imagination. This ability to weave stories, to create meaning out of the chaos of existence, was the foundation for everything that came next: civilization, art, religion, and science. It was the beginning of the human journey, not just through time, but through the realm of ideas. As Homo sapiens began to craft their stories, they also began to craft the world around them. Early humans were not simply passive observers of nature, they were active participants, shaping their environment in ways that no other species had ever done before. The first tools were simple: stones shaped to create a sharp edge, branches stripped and fashioned into spears, but over time, these tools evolved into something much more sophisticated. Humans discovered that they could alter their surroundings, bend nature to their will, and, in doing so, carve out a niche for themselves in an unforgiving world. The mastery of fire, for example, marked a monumental shift in human history. What had once been a dangerous force, wild, untamable, became a source of warmth, light, and protection. It was no longer something to be feared, it was something to be harnessed, controlled, and used to transform the world. Fire allowed humans to cook food, unlocking new nutrients and making life easier. It allowed them to stay warm in the coldest months, to ward off predators, and to expand their range. The control of fire was the first step toward a new kind of relationship with nature, one where humans were no longer at its mercy but instead stood as its stewards. The discovery of tools followed a similar trajectory. At first, the tools were rudimentary: stones, bones, and sticks. But with each passing generation, these tools grew more specialized, more refined. Humans discovered how to shape stone into cutting implements, how to craft bone into needles, and how to fashion wood into spears. Each new tool was a small victory, a triumph over the natural world, and a sign of humanity's increasing control over its environment. These tools were not just physical objects, they were expressions of human ingenuity and intelligence. They represented the ability to think ahead, to plan, and to adapt. With tools, humans could hunt more efficiently, build better shelters, and even create art. The very act of making tools was a form of storytelling, a way of communicating not only the immediate need but also a sense of identity and purpose. These tools were the earliest artifacts of human culture, the first hints of the civilization that would one day rise. Yet it was not just the physical environment that Homo sapiens transformed. They also began to shape their social structures in ways that were equally revolutionary. The early human groups, once small and scattered, began to coalesce into larger communities. With these larger groups came new challenges: how to divide labor, how to share resources, and how to maintain order. The first steps toward social organization were humble but essential. Humans began to form bonds not just through kinship but through shared purpose. They developed systems of cooperation and trade, exchanged knowledge, and supported one another in ways that went beyond the immediate family unit. These early social structures, though simple, laid the foundation for the complex societies that would follow. As social bonds deepened, so too did the capacity for storytelling. Humans began to weave their stories not just around survival, but around shared experiences, common values, and collective memory. These stories became the glue that held society together, providing a sense of identity and continuity. The stories of ancestors, of heroes and gods, of triumphs and tragedies, these were the building blocks of culture. They served not only to explain the world but to shape it, to reinforce social norms and values. In this way, storytelling was not just a form of communication but a form of social control. It allowed communities to maintain cohesion and stability, even in the face of adversity. The stories people told about their world, their history, and their place within it became the foundation for their social fabric. As Homo sapiens spread across the globe, they encountered new environments, new challenges, and new peoples. The adaptability that had been central to their survival now became a defining characteristic of their culture. Humans did not just survive in new places, they thrived, transforming foreign lands into extensions of their own world. They developed new technologies, new tools, and new ways of life, each innovation adding to the complex mosaic of human culture. In the process, they also encountered new stories, stories of different gods, different heroes, different ways of seeing the world. These stories, while different from their own, would eventually become part of the shared human experience. But even as Homo sapiens adapted to new environments and new cultures, they continued to confront the same fundamental question: how to survive in a world that was often indifferent, if not hostile, to their existence. This question shaped the way they viewed the world. It shaped their stories, their tools, and their social structures. And it also shaped their relationship with the earth. Early humans were keenly aware of the fragility of life, and they knew that survival was not guaranteed. The earth was a harsh and unpredictable place, and life could be lost in an instant. This awareness of mortality gave rise to some of the earliest forms of spirituality. As humans began to grapple with the realities of death, they sought explanations for what lay beyond. They began to create myths and rituals around death, around the afterlife, and around the forces that controlled life itself. These spiritual beliefs were not just a way of explaining the world, they were a way of coping with its uncertainties. They provided a framework for understanding the unknown, for making sense of the chaos that surrounded them. The relationship between humans and their environment was one of deep complexity. On one hand, humans were masterful manipulators of the physical world. They used tools and fire to shape their surroundings, and they used language and stories to shape their societies. But on the other hand, they were always aware of their vulnerability, their smallness in the face of nature's vast power. This paradox, of being both masters of their environment and humble participants within it, defined the human condition for millennia. It was the tension between control and submission, between creation and destruction, that would fuel the development of human culture, driving humans to create new technologies, new societies, and new ways of understanding the world. As they spread across the earth, humans began to build civilizations, each more complex than the last. But at the heart of all of these civilizations was the same basic drive: survival. The tools, the stories, the social bonds, these were all part of a larger narrative about what it meant to be human, about what it meant to live in a world that was both beautiful and brutal. And it was in this delicate balance, this dance between control and chaos, that Homo sapiens found their place in the world. As Homo sapiens began to venture further from their origins in Africa, the vast unknown stretched out before them, a canvas of untamed wilderness, hostile climates, and new challenges. With each migration, each expansion, they faced an ever-evolving set of obstacles, fluctuating climates, unfamiliar landscapes, and encounters with other species, both human and animal. In this uncertain world, survival required not only adaptability but also the ability to forge new connections, to bridge the gaps between different environments, and to create strategies for thriving in diverse settings. As they encountered new territories, Homo sapiens had to develop new ways of living, new ways of interpreting the world, and, crucially, new ways of cooperating with one another. In these new lands, they also encountered a landscape full of other peoples, and sometimes these encounters led to integration, assimilation, or conflict. The stories of survival were no longer just about the immediate family or small group, they became about entire communities and, eventually, entire cultures, expanding over vast territories and reaching across vast time periods. Early humans were still largely dependent on nature, hunting and gathering for their sustenance. Yet they also began to realize that nature could be shaped to meet their needs. As they spread across Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas, Homo sapiens began to learn how to domesticate animals, cultivating partnerships with certain species to ensure a more stable food supply. They raised goats and sheep for milk, cattle for meat, and dogs for hunting or companionship. These domestic animals became essential partners in the human story. Through selective breeding, humans shaped the animals to their own needs, ensuring that food sources remained steady, and enabling them to settle in areas that had once been too harsh or uncertain for long-term habitation. But the domestication of animals was only part of the story. Humans also began to experiment with agriculture. In the fertile river valleys of the Middle East, the domestication of plants began to take root. Early grains, such as wheat and barley, were cultivated, changing the way humans interacted with the land. No longer were they just nomadic wanderers, moving with the seasons in search of food. Now, they could plant, grow, and harvest, creating the first sustainable food systems. Agriculture allowed human populations to grow larger, creating the first villages and towns. These settlements required new forms of social organization, new ways of governing and managing resources. With the rise of agriculture came the rise of trade, as surpluses of food were exchanged for goods and ideas. It was a pivotal moment in human history, a moment when people began to transition from mere survival to a more complex, structured way of life. The shift from hunter-gatherer societies to agrarian ones marked the beginning of civilization as we know it. But even as humans learned to master the land, they were not without their challenges. The climates they encountered on their journeys were often unpredictable. The ice ages had shaped much of the landscape, and as the climate warmed and cooled, the land shifted in dramatic ways. Rivers could flood their banks and wash away crops, droughts could destroy entire harvests. Even as Homo sapiens learned to control the environment, they were still at the mercy of nature's larger cycles. Yet, in many ways, this vulnerability drove them to greater innovation. Humans began to develop irrigation systems, building canals and aqueducts to control the flow of water. They discovered how to fertilize the soil, rotate crops, and preserve food for the future. These advancements, though simple by modern standards, were groundbreaking at the time, and they allowed human societies to expand and flourish in ways that would have been impossible without them. As settlements grew, so too did the complexity of human society. The small, nomadic groups of early humans gave way to larger, more complex communities. The development of agriculture and trade networks meant that people could specialize in different crafts. Pottery, weaving, and metallurgy began to emerge as specialized trades, and with them came the first signs of social stratification. Not everyone needed to be involved in food production, some could focus on the arts, others on governance, and still others on religious practices. This specialization of labor allowed for the creation of more sophisticated societies, with different roles and responsibilities for each member. But with the rise of specialization came a new set of challenges. As people began to settle into more permanent communities, they had to develop systems of governance, laws, and social norms to maintain order. The rise of agriculture and trade created surpluses, but it also created inequalities. Some families or individuals accumulated wealth, while others remained poor. Social hierarchies began to emerge, and with them, the need for systems of control. Leaders, often selected based on their ability to command respect or organize large groups, became central figures in these early societies. Humanity's relationship with the environment, too, became more intricate. The early humans, who once viewed the world as a series of obstacles to be overcome, began to see the land as something to be molded, shaped, and cultivated. The earth was no longer just a place of survival, it was a place of potential, a canvas for human creativity. Yet, in this process of domestication, something fundamental shifted. The human connection with the wild began to erode. The untamed landscapes of the early human world gave way to fields, orchards, and settlements. The nomadic spirit, which had once been at the heart of human existence, was gradually replaced by the sedentary life of farming, trade, and urbanization. This transformation from a nomadic to a settled existence had profound consequences. The intimacy humans once had with the natural world began to fade, replaced by a more distant, utilitarian relationship with the environment. The wild was no longer something to be experienced firsthand, but something to be controlled. In the process, the human story began to shift from one of pure survival to one of manipulation and creation. Yet, even as Homo sapiens began to shape their environment, they remained connected to the stories of their ancestors. The same ancient narratives that had once guided them through the dangers of the wild now helped them navigate the complexities of settled life. The stories evolved, becoming more elaborate, more symbolic. They told of gods and heroes who shaped the land, of great floods that cleansed the earth, and of the cycles of life and death that were mirrored in the changing seasons. These stories, woven into the fabric of human culture, would continue to evolve, guiding humanity through its journey from the wild to the cities, from survival to civilization. As Homo sapiens began to shape the world in their image, they also began to encounter the inevitable complexities that come with civilization. The very advances that had enabled them to settle and expand, agriculture, domestication, and specialized labor, began to introduce challenges that required new forms of social and political organization. With the rise of agriculture, permanent settlements flourished, and the need for coordinated effort grew. These early human communities, once small and familial, now became larger, more interconnected, and more complex. But with that growth came the emergence of inequality, power struggles, and the need for governance. It was no longer enough to simply survive, now humans had to navigate the intricate webs of social interaction, resource distribution, and leadership. As the first cities began to rise in places like Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and ancient Egypt, so too did the first signs of hierarchy. No longer was the survival of the group simply a matter of cooperation and shared resources, it now required the oversight of those in positions of power. The emergence of leaders, kings, and priests marked the beginning of organized society, but it also heralded the rise of conflict, war, and inequality. Some humans controlled resources, land, water, food, while others worked the fields, built the cities, or fought the wars. This division of labor, once a necessary adaptation for survival, now became the foundation for social stratification. The world of Homo sapiens had shifted from one of relative egalitarianism to one where power was concentrated in the hands of a few. The power of storytelling, which had once been used to bind small groups together, now began to be employed by those in power to maintain control. Leaders, priests, and rulers began to craft stories that legitimized their authority, often invoking divine sanction to justify their rule. The gods, who had once been seen as distant and unknowable forces, were now brought into the fold of human society as figures who could bless or punish, reward or condemn. Through religion, rulers were able to establish not only social norms but also the moral and legal codes that governed everyday life. These stories of divine favor or wrath became the backbone of social order. But even as leaders sought to control the narrative, the stories of the people began to shift. In the cities, humans were no longer just farmers, artisans, or warriors. They became thinkers, philosophers, writers, and scholars, who began to question the stories they had inherited. This intellectual awakening, which blossomed in the ancient world, began to change the way humans saw themselves and their place in the cosmos. For the first time, humans began to think critically about their existence, their gods, and their society. In places like ancient Greece, the philosophical tradition took root, challenging old stories and offering new ways of understanding the world. The concept of democracy emerged, a system where individuals could share in the governance of their society. For the first time in history, humans began to entertain the idea of governance not by divine right, but by the consent of the governed. The stories of kings and gods were supplanted by stories of human agency, of self-determination, and of reason. The rise of philosophy in the ancient world was a pivotal moment in human history, a turning point where stories began to evolve from myths and legends to systems of thought that sought to explain the very nature of existence. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, different stories were being told. In China, Confucianism emerged as a way to organize society around principles of respect, order, and harmony. In India, the great epics of the Mahabharata and Ramayana reflected the complexities of duty, honor, and morality. These stories were not just cultural artifacts, they were frameworks for understanding how humans should live in relation to one another and to the divine. They offered guidance on how to live a virtuous life, how to be a good ruler, and how to maintain peace and prosperity. Even in the face of societal inequality, these stories provided a sense of meaning, a structure that allowed people to understand their place in the world. The shift from survival to civilization marked a dramatic transformation in the way Homo sapiens lived and thought. Early humans, who had once been bound by the rhythms of nature, now sought to create order out of chaos. They sought to master not only the land but also their own social structures, crafting systems of law, governance, and morality that were meant to ensure stability and peace. But as with all human endeavors, these systems were not without their flaws. While some societies flourished under centralized rule, others were plagued by corruption, inequality, and conflict. The stories that had once united people were now being used to divide them, to justify wars and violence, to solidify power in the hands of the few. Yet, even amidst the darkness of oppression and inequality, stories continued to evolve. The human capacity for resilience, for hope, for creativity, and for change found expression in the arts, in literature, in music. The great works of art and philosophy that arose from the ancient world were not just reflections of the time in which they were created but also sources of resistance to the injustices of the world. The stories of the oppressed, of the marginalized, and of the revolutionaries began to rise to the surface, challenging the status quo and offering visions of a more just world. By now, Homo sapiens had come a long way from the early days of survival in Africa. They had transformed their world, for better or for worse, and they had created cultures and civilizations that spanned continents. They had gone from simple stories of survival to complex myths and philosophies that explored the nature of existence, governance, and the divine. But with all the power they had accumulated, the question remained: had they learned enough from their stories to create a better future? The trajectory of human history was now shaped by the stories they told themselves and one another, and it was those stories that would continue to shape the future. As Homo sapiens ventured further into the world, and civilizations grew in size and complexity, they began to encounter a new kind of challenge: the tension between individual freedom and societal control. With the development of cities, trade, and the centralization of power, the very structure of human life began to shift. No longer were people simply surviving in small, self-sufficient groups. Now, they were part of larger systems, systems that required cooperation, but also imposed restrictions. As humans evolved socially, their stories began to reflect this new complexity, capturing both the benefits and the struggles of living in an organized society. This tension between the individual and the collective would define much of the human experience, and it would continue to play a central role in the narrative of civilization. The idea of governance, which had once been a simple matter of survival in small groups, now became a sophisticated system of laws and rulers. The earliest forms of governance were rooted in divine authority. Kings, emperors, and pharaohs often claimed their right to rule was granted by the gods, and their rule was seen as an extension of divine will. The stories that legitimized these rulers were steeped in religious symbolism. Gods were invoked not only to justify the power of rulers but to structure the moral and social order of society. The temples, the rituals, the divine statues, all served as physical manifestations of the stories that kept the social order intact. These stories were not just metaphysical, they were practical, offering explanations for everything from the seasons to the roles of individuals in society. But as civilizations advanced, so did the questioning of this divine right. The idea that rulers were above reproach, that their authority came directly from the gods, began to face resistance. Humans, who had once been bound by the dictates of survival, now started to ask more profound questions about the structure of their societies. The stories of kings and gods were challenged by new ideas about the rights of the individual, about the possibility of governance by consent rather than divine mandate. Philosophers began to examine the very nature of power and rule, questioning the morality of centralized authority and the rights of the governed. This shift in thinking marked the beginning of new narratives, ones that sought to balance the power of the individual with the needs of the community. Ancient Greece, with its experiments in democracy, gave rise to a new way of thinking about governance. The stories that emerged from this time, stories of democracy, equality, and justice, became the foundation for much of Western political thought. These stories began to emphasize the importance of the individual as part of a collective, not just as a subject of a ruler's will. This was the beginning of a long, ongoing story in which people began to imagine a society not just based on hierarchy, but on the shared will of the people. As time went on, these ideas spread across the world, influencing revolutions, movements, and ideologies that would shape the future. The stories of freedom, equality, and justice, which began to emerge in ancient Greece and Rome, took on new meaning during the Enlightenment, when thinkers like Locke, Rousseau, and Montesquieu advanced the idea of natural rights, the separation of powers, and the social contract. These ideas would later fuel revolutions in France, America, and beyond, challenging the old systems of monarchy and feudalism, and pushing humanity toward new ways of understanding governance, society, and the role of the individual. Yet, even as the stories of liberty and equality flourished, the reality of governing large, complex societies remained fraught with difficulties. The more centralized power became, the more susceptible it was to corruption. Leaders who were once seen as divine or semi-divine figures were increasingly challenged by the very systems they sought to control. As cities grew, so did inequality, and the gap between the rich and the poor widened. The concentration of power in the hands of a few led to oppression, while the stories of justice and fairness often clashed with the reality of exploitation and class divisions. The Industrial Revolution further complicated the narrative. In an era of rapid technological advancement, capitalism, and urbanization, the stories of equality and opportunity became more complex. The rise of industry and the growth of wealth for a few contrasted sharply with the harsh conditions faced by the working class. The power of the individual, which had once been celebrated as a cornerstone of democratic society, now seemed to be at odds with the sprawling, impersonal forces of industrialization. The stories of freedom and self-determination became entangled with stories of labor strikes, exploitation, and the quest for social justice. As industrial societies took shape, the question of how to balance the needs of the individual with the demands of the collective became even more urgent. The stories that were told in the halls of power and in the streets began to reflect this tension. The story of the individual striving for personal freedom, the story of the collective working toward the common good, these became the central narratives of modern civilization. Yet, in the background of these stories, the darker side of humanity's social experiments often lurked, the stories of inequality, of class struggles, of revolutions and counter-revolutions. The modern world continued to evolve, and with it, the stories of Homo sapiens. As the 20th and 21st centuries unfolded, new questions about identity, power, and society emerged. The globalized world, with its interconnected economies, digital technologies, and multinational corporations, presented new challenges. The old stories of nationalism, imperialism, and colonialism were replaced by new narratives of globalization, multiculturalism, and individual rights. But as societies became more interconnected, the gap between rich and poor continued to widen, and the balance between individual freedoms and social responsibility remained precarious. Throughout this journey, Homo sapiens have struggled with the tension between personal freedom and collective order, between the desire to assert individuality and the necessity of working together. The stories they tell themselves continue to evolve in response to these challenges, capturing both the triumphs and the contradictions of human civilization. In the end, it is this ongoing narrative, one that is constantly rewritten by the forces of change, that defines the human experience. The struggle between individual agency and societal needs, between the pursuit of freedom and the need for governance, continues to be the defining story of our time. As Homo sapiens moved into the modern era, they were confronted with a world radically different from the one that had shaped their earliest ancestors. The rapid advances in technology, communication, and industry over the past few centuries created a society that was not only interconnected but constantly evolving at an unprecedented pace. The stories that once centered on survival strategies, and the mastery of nature now began to take on new dimensions. These new stories were no longer solely about physical survival, they were about the survival of identity, of culture, of humanity itself. As the world became smaller and more interconnected, the old stories of nations, kingdoms, and tribes gave way to the grand narratives of global cooperation, technological progress, and the pursuit of freedom. But with these grand new stories also came new dilemmas, ethical, environmental, and existential questions that humanity had never before been forced to answer. The rise of industrialization brought the world into a new era, one that was defined by the power of machines, the harnessing of energy, and the rapid expansion of human activity. The stories of human potential became intertwined with the stories of machines and technology. Humanity, once limited by the constraints of the natural world, now seemed to be on the verge of breaking free from those limits. The invention of the steam engine, the discovery of electricity, and the development of the airplane gave humans the power to reshape the world in ways that were once inconceivable. It was as though humanity had stepped into a new chapter of its story, a chapter where progress was not just a possibility but an expectation. And yet, alongside these extraordinary achievements came a series of new challenges. The same technologies that promised to bring prosperity also introduced unforeseen consequences. Industrialization led to environmental degradation on a massive scale. The pollution of rivers, the depletion of forests, and the rapid expansion of cities all came at the cost of the natural world. What had once been the dominion of humanity now seemed at risk of being lost, overwhelmed by the very technologies that were supposed to improve life. As the stories of human achievement reached new heights, they began to reveal cracks in the foundation, questions about sustainability, equity, and the true cost of progress. The rise of capitalism, as a driving force behind industrialization, also brought new social dynamics into play. The old feudal hierarchies were replaced by a new class structure, where wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of a few, while the many struggled to survive. The narrative of individual achievement, the belief that anyone, regardless of their origins, could rise to success, became the cornerstone of modern societies. But this narrative, too, was not without its flaws. The economic system that promised freedom and opportunity for all often resulted in exploitation, inequality, and a widening gap between the rich and the poor. As the wealthy elites thrived, the working classes were left behind, their stories often overlooked or ignored in the rush for profit and progress. The narrative of industrialization, however, was not one of simple destruction. Amid the smoke of factories and the noise of machinery, new stories began to emerge, stories of resistance, of solidarity, and of social change. Workers organized strikes, demanding better wages and working conditions, and in doing so, they redefined what it meant to be human in a rapidly changing world. The stories of workers, of the oppressed, and of those who had been marginalized found new voices during this period. These voices became part of a larger narrative that sought not only to understand the world but to change it. The rise of labor unions, women's suffrage movements, and the civil rights movements all emerged as responses to the inequalities and injustices that were inherent in industrial society. At the same time, the rapid pace of technological innovation began to create a paradox for humanity. As the world became more interconnected, it also became more fragmented. The stories of global progress, of universal freedoms, began to clash with the realities of local cultures, traditions, and values. The rise of imperialism, colonialism, and the expansion of Western influence into the rest of the world created new fault lines in the human story. The stories of the oppressed, colonized peoples, indigenous cultures, and minorities, were often silenced or erased as dominant narratives of progress and civilization took center stage. Yet, even in the face of such oppression, new stories of resistance and resilience arose. The voices of those who had been silenced by empire or by systems of exploitation began to rise, demanding recognition and justice. In the 20th century, wars, revolutions, and ideologies further complicated the human story. The horrors of World War I and World War II, the rise of totalitarian regimes, and the ideological battles of the Cold War revealed the darker side of human ambition. Yet, even in the midst of these tragedies, humanity found ways to rebuild, to resist, and to create anew. The stories of survival, of unity, and of the pursuit of peace became central to the narrative of the 20th century. The creation of international institutions like the United Nations, the rise of global movements for human rights, and the ongoing struggle for social justice all spoke to a new understanding of humanity's potential to transcend the mistakes of the past. At the same time, the 20th and 21st centuries brought about a new revolution, one driven by information. The rise of computers, the internet, and digital technologies has transformed the way humans tell their stories. In a world where information is instantly accessible, the narrative of humanity has become more fluid, more fragmented, and more immediate than ever before. The stories that were once confined to books, paintings, or oral traditions are now shared on screens, transmitted through networks, and experienced in real time. This new form of storytelling, digital storytelling, has opened up new possibilities for human connection, expression, and understanding. However, this new era of digital connectivity also brings new questions. In the age of artificial intelligence, social media, and digital surveillance, humanity is faced with the challenge of navigating a world where truth, identity, and privacy are constantly in flux. The stories that define us are now shaped not just by our own experiences but by algorithms, data, and the voices of millions of others. The question of who controls these narratives, and how they shape our lives, has never been more urgent. In this new age of digital connection, the stories of Homo sapiens are far from over. They are being rewritten, remixed, and reinterpreted every day. The challenge that lies ahead is not just about survival in the physical world, it is about navigating the complex, interconnected world of information, identity, and power. How we tell our stories in this new world, and what stories we choose to tell, will shape the future of humanity in ways that are still unfolding. As the story of Homo sapiens continues to unfold, the question of what it means to be human in a rapidly changing world becomes increasingly complex. In a time where technological advancement is reshaping every aspect of life, humanity faces the pressing challenge of how to navigate this new world while staying true to the very essence of what makes us human. The stories we once told ourselves about progress, mastery, and the human spirit are being tested by innovations that blur the line between the organic and the artificial. The story of Homo sapiens, once centered on survival and the mastery of nature, is now intertwined with questions about the future of consciousness, artificial intelligence, and the boundaries of human identity. The rise of artificial intelligence has brought forth an entirely new chapter in the human story, one that raises questions about the nature of intelligence, creativity, and the mind itself. In many ways, AI represents the next step in the evolution of human technology. What began with the invention of tools and the control of fire now extends to the creation of machines that can learn, adapt, and even create on their own. The idea that machines could one day surpass human intelligence has long been the stuff of science fiction, but it is now increasingly becoming a reality. As AI grows more sophisticated, it challenges our understanding of what it means to be alive, to be conscious, and to be human. One of the most profound implications of artificial intelligence is its potential to transform the nature of work. In the past, human labor was central to the functioning of society. People worked the land, built the cities, and created the infrastructure that sustained civilization. But as AI and automation take over more and more tasks, the very notion of work is being redefined. Machines are now capable of performing tasks that once required human hands, driving cars, diagnosing diseases, even composing music. As machines become more adept at these tasks, humans are faced with a fundamental question: what is left for us to do? For centuries, we have defined ourselves by our labor, but in a world where machines can perform most tasks more efficiently than we ever could, the concept of work itself is being called into question. This shift has profound implications for the social fabric. If machines can replace human labor, what happens to the value of human life? How do we redefine purpose and meaning in a world where traditional forms of work no longer exist? Alongside the rise of AI, advances in biotechnology and genetic engineering present another challenge to human identity. For the first time in history, humanity has the ability to alter its own biology at the genetic level. The potential to cure diseases, extend lifespan, and enhance human abilities through genetic modification is no longer a distant dream, it is becoming a tangible reality. This new form of biotechnology offers unprecedented opportunities, but it also raises difficult ethical questions. What does it mean to enhance a human being beyond its natural limitations? If we can edit the genes of embryos, how do we decide who gets to decide which traits are desirable or undesirable? These are not just questions for scientists and ethicists, they are questions that touch on the very essence of what it means to be human. The possibility of creating designer babies, or even genetically modified humans, challenges the boundaries of nature and raises concerns about the future of human diversity and equality. The question of human enhancement goes beyond genetics and touches on the broader issue of what it means to be human in a post-human world. With the rise of cyborg technology and brain-computer interfaces, we are no longer limited to our biological bodies. The idea of merging human consciousness with machines, of augmenting ourselves with artificial limbs, enhanced senses, or even digital minds, raises fundamental questions about the nature of identity and consciousness. If our minds can be uploaded into machines, if we can live forever in digital form, do we still remain human? Or do we become something else entirely? These questions challenge the very core of human existence, forcing us to reconsider what it means to be alive, to be conscious, and to be an individual. These technological advancements are not just reshaping our personal lives, they are also redefining the global landscape. As AI, biotechnology, and cybernetics transform the way we live, they are also creating new divides between those who have access to these technologies and those who do not. The gap between the rich and the poor is no longer just about wealth, it is about access to life-changing technologies. In a world where the powerful can augment their bodies and minds with the latest technologies, what happens to those who are left behind? The story of human progress, once defined by collective struggle and shared achievement, is now at risk of becoming a story of technological inequality, where the benefits of innovation are concentrated in the hands of a few. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected through digital networks, the global distribution of power and resources is being reshaped by the forces of technology. These forces, while bringing great potential for advancement, also create new challenges that require careful consideration of how to balance progress with ethics, equality, and human dignity. At the same time, the rapid pace of technological change is forcing humanity to confront an even more existential question: what is the purpose of progress if it comes at the cost of our environment and the survival of our planet? Climate change, deforestation, and the depletion of natural resources are the direct results of the technological revolution that has allowed humanity to conquer the Earth. As we unlock new technologies to solve the problems we've created, we must ask whether we are capable of sustaining these advancements without further harm to the planet. The narrative of human progress, so long defined by our ability to conquer nature, is now confronted by the reality that we may have conquered too much. The future of humanity hinges on whether we can learn to live in harmony with the Earth, or whether we will continue down a path of unchecked exploitation. In this new chapter of the human story, the tension between innovation and preservation, between human ambition and environmental responsibility, is at the forefront. The choices we make in the coming decades will shape not only the future of Homo sapiens but the future of life on Earth. The stories we tell ourselves about progress, about what it means to be human, will determine whether we can navigate this new world of technological possibility while retaining our humanity, our sense of purpose, and our connection to the planet we call home. As humanity advances into the unknown reaches of the 21st century, the question of identity and purpose continues to resonate through the stories we tell. The age-old narratives of survival, community, and progress have evolved, and now, we find ourselves grappling with the deeper, more complex questions of what it means to exist in an interconnected world. In an era of unparalleled technological advancement, the boundaries of human experience are being pushed in ways that our ancestors could never have imagined. Yet, with every new frontier crossed, there is a profound sense of unease, a sense that the rapid pace of change is outstripping our capacity to understand and control it. In this new age, the very essence of humanity is being questioned. Are we still in control of our own story, or are we simply actors in a script written by the forces of technology, economics, and the global stage? The rapid pace of technological innovation, from artificial intelligence to biotechnology, has altered the very nature of what it means to be human. The rise of machine learning, neural networks, and autonomous systems challenges our ideas of intelligence and consciousness. What happens to the concept of human agency when machines begin to perform tasks that were once the sole domain of the human mind? Are we still the creators, or have we become the created? As artificial intelligence continues to advance, it blurs the lines between human and machine, raising profound questions about what it means to be alive and to think. These are not just philosophical musings but pressing questions that demand urgent answers as we stand on the brink of a new era. If we can build machines that think, create, and learn on their own, where does that leave humanity? What happens to the stories of individual triumph, creativity, and human intelligence in a world where machines may outperform us in nearly every field? Beyond the question of technology's impact on intelligence, the age of biotechnology is bringing us face to face with the possibility of altering our very bodies and minds. Genetic engineering, once the stuff of science fiction, is rapidly becoming a reality. The ability to edit genes, to cure genetic diseases, and even to enhance human physical and mental capacities is now within reach. The concept of the designer baby, once a controversial idea, is now something that many in the scientific community view as inevitable. But what does this mean for the future of humanity? If we can shape the next generation's genetic code, what ethical boundaries must we establish? How do we determine who gets to decide what constitutes a better human being? In the quest to improve ourselves, could we lose the very qualities that make us human, the imperfections, the vulnerabilities, and the diversity that have long been central to the human experience? At the same time, the rise of biotechnology raises fundamental questions about the nature of life itself. If we can extend lifespans, enhance our physical and cognitive abilities, and even transfer human consciousness to digital formats, what becomes of the idea of death? Historically, death has been an intrinsic part of the human narrative. It has shaped our beliefs, our philosophies, and our understanding of the meaning of life. But if we remove death from the equation, what remains? Can we live forever, or is immortality a myth, an unattainable ideal? In a world where technology offers the possibility of indefinite life, are we prepared to grapple with the moral, social, and emotional consequences of living beyond the natural limits of the human body? And more importantly, can we maintain our humanity in a world that increasingly resembles something out of science fiction? As biotechnology offers the promise of physical and mental enhancements, it also prompts questions about the social and ethical implications of such advances. Who will have access to these technologies? Will they be reserved for the wealthy, further deepening the divide between the haves and the have-nots? In a world where some are able to genetically enhance their children, while others remain confined to the biological limitations of nature, what happens to the concept of equality? As genetic editing becomes more accessible, will we see the rise of a new form of elitism, where those who have the means to access these technologies are seen as better or more advanced than those who cannot? The potential for genetic engineering to exacerbate existing inequalities is a real concern, one that demands careful consideration as we move forward. In this new age of enhancement, the very concept of what it means to be human is being stretched to its limits. If our minds and bodies can be altered, enhanced, and perfected, what happens to the core of our identity? Are we still individuals, or are we simply products of our environment and our technological creations? The boundaries between human and machine, between the natural and the artificial, are becoming increasingly blurred, and with it, the stories we tell about ourselves are being rewritten. What happens when the very essence of what it means to be human is no longer tied to the biology of the body, but to the choices we make about how to shape and enhance it? Can we still find meaning in a world where the line between human and machine is no longer clear? These questions are not simply academic, they are at the heart of the challenges we face as a species in the 21st century. The advances in technology, science, and medicine are forcing us to confront the limitations of our own understanding of what it means to be human. As we step into an age where the boundaries of life, identity, and the human experience are increasingly fluid, we must ask ourselves, who are we becoming? The stories that we tell in this new era will not just be about survival or progress, but about the very nature of our existence, our identity, and our place in the world. The human story, once defined by the struggle for survival and mastery over nature, is now defined by the search for meaning in a world where the possibilities are endless, but the questions remain just as pressing as ever. In the midst of rapid technological advancement, humanity is also faced with an existential question that has lingered throughout its history: what is the purpose of all this progress? For centuries, humans have defined their existence through the pursuit of knowledge, innovation, and the conquest of nature. The stories we have told ourselves, from the earliest cave paintings to the towering cities of today, have been shaped by the belief that progress is not only possible but inevitable. But as the pace of change accelerates, the very meaning of progress is being called into question. As humans move toward the edges of what is possible, a new narrative is emerging, one that confronts the fundamental tension between our desire to transcend our limits and the consequences of doing so. What happens when the drive for progress threatens to outpace our ability to understand its implications? One of the most profound dilemmas of our age is the challenge of balancing technological advancement with the preservation of the environment. For centuries, humanity has seen itself as separate from the natural world, as if nature were something to be tamed and controlled. The Industrial Revolution was a moment of triumph for human ingenuity, yet it came at a steep price. The natural world, once vast and untamable, was rapidly reshaped by human hands. Cities grew, forests were cleared, and landscapes were forever altered. The stories of progress that we tell ourselves are often intertwined with the stories of destruction. As we build new technologies and push the boundaries of human achievement, we also leave behind a trail of environmental degradation. The very same advancements that have enabled us to thrive have also led to the depletion of natural resources, the extinction of species, and the destabilization of ecosystems. In the 21st century, humanity stands at a crossroads. The same technological advancements that allowed us to reach the moon and harness the power of the atom also threaten to undo the delicate balance of life on Earth. The looming specter of climate change, driven by centuries of industrial activity, has made it clear that our progress has come at a cost. As temperatures rise, glaciers melt, and weather patterns shift, the effects of our actions are no longer distant possibilities, they are present realities. The question now is not whether we can continue to progress but whether we can do so in a way that is sustainable. Can we build a future that honors the planet and the ecosystems that sustain us, or are we doomed to continue down a path of irreversible destruction? At the heart of this question lies a deep philosophical dilemma: what is the true meaning of progress? If progress is only measured by the growth of technology and the accumulation of wealth, then it is clear that we are on an unsustainable path. But if progress is defined by the quality of life, the preservation of natural beauty, and the well-being of future generations, then the story changes. In this new narrative, progress is not a linear path of endless growth but a journey toward greater harmony with the natural world. It is about finding ways to live within the Earth's limits, to embrace sustainability and balance rather than unchecked expansion. As humans continue to explore the farthest reaches of space and the depths of the ocean, the true test of progress will not be how far we can push the boundaries of the known world, but how well we can nurture the world that has sustained us for millennia. The stories we tell ourselves about progress are also shaped by our collective relationship to the past. While we are constantly looking to the future, the lessons of history are more important than ever. The mistakes of the past, colonialism, exploitation, environmental destruction, are not just relics of bygone eras, they are warnings. These mistakes are part of the ongoing narrative of human history, and unless we learn from them, they will continue to shape our future. The challenge of the modern age is to reconcile the desire for progress with the need to heal the wounds we have inflicted on the planet and its inhabitants. We must confront the legacy of exploitation, not just as a historical phenomenon but as a living part of our contemporary reality. The stories of the past can guide us, but only if we are willing to listen and to change. The emergence of new technologies like artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and biotechnology also forces us to reconsider our relationship to humanity itself. As we move into an era where machines can think, adapt, and even create on their own, we are confronted with questions about the value of human life. What happens when machines can perform tasks better than humans? When AI can write novels, compose symphonies, or design artwork, where does that leave the human artist, the human thinker? The drive for technological mastery has long been a defining characteristic of human progress, but now we are faced with a world where the very qualities that make us human, our creativity, our intelligence, our uniqueness, are being replicated and perhaps surpassed by machines. In response to this, many people are beginning to seek deeper, more meaningful definitions of progress. Rather than focusing solely on technological achievements, there is a growing movement that advocates for a return to a more human-centered approach. This movement emphasizes the importance of relationships, community, spirituality, and emotional well-being as essential components of a truly progressive society. It asks, how can we cultivate more meaningful lives? How can we use technology not to replace human connection but to enhance it? The true measure of progress may not be in the gadgets we create or the wealth we accumulate, but in the depth of our relationships, the richness of our experiences, and the sense of purpose we find in our lives. As the human story unfolds, it is clear that the narrative of progress is not a one-size-fits-all concept. It is a story that must evolve with the times, one that must be rewritten in response to new challenges and opportunities. The future of humanity is not a predetermined path, it is a story that we are all writing, each of us contributing to the narrative with the choices we make, the values we uphold, and the way we interact with the world. As we move into this new era, we must ask ourselves, what kind of future do we want to create? The answer to that question lies not in the technology we develop, but in the stories we tell and the choices we make about how we live, both as individuals and as a global community. The human story, when viewed through the lens of history, reveals a continuous cycle of striving, adapting, and overcoming. Yet, as we stand on the precipice of the future, the questions we face today are more profound than ever before. The quest for mastery over the natural world and the drive for self-improvement that has defined humanity's evolution are now met with challenges that go beyond survival, that probe deeper into our very essence. Humanity's technological prowess has placed us in a unique position, capable of altering the world around us in ways that no other species has ever achieved. But with that power comes a responsibility that is perhaps too often overlooked, the responsibility to reflect on the consequences of our actions and to question whether we are truly progressing in ways that honor our humanity and the world we inhabit. The promise of technological advancement has been a beacon for humanity since the first tools were crafted by early Homo sapiens. In every age, from the mastery of fire to the exploration of space, the story of human progress has been intertwined with the development of new technologies. Each innovation has opened up new possibilities, expanding our capacity to shape the world and our place within it. But as we continue to develop technologies that allow us to transcend our biological limits, we are increasingly confronted with the question, what happens when we reach a point where technology no longer serves us, but begins to define us? The creation of artificial intelligence, the advent of biotechnology, and the rise of cybernetics all push us toward a future where our understanding of what it means to be human is challenged at its core. The promise of immortality, whether through the transfer of consciousness into machines or the extension of life through biotechnology, is one of the most provocative aspects of this new era. The allure of immortality has captured the human imagination for centuries, and yet, as we move closer to the reality of extended life, the question arises, is eternal life truly desirable? Does immortality hold the same allure when the natural cycle of life and death is disrupted? What becomes of the human experience when it is no longer finite, when the inevitability of death no longer imposes the urgency and meaning that have traditionally defined our lives? The stories we tell about death and immortality have always reflected our fears, hopes, and deepest desires. Yet, as science advances, we must ask ourselves whether we can maintain the values and depth of human experience in a world that offers life without end. As we look toward the future, the stories of progress must grapple not just with the promises of technological breakthroughs but also with the ethical, environmental, and social costs associated with them. The drive for innovation, often framed as an unquestionable good, has historically overlooked the impact of progress on the planet and its ecosystems. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and the depletion of natural resources are the byproducts of centuries of industrial growth and technological expansion. Yet, despite the mounting evidence of environmental collapse, the narrative of progress continues to dominate. The question is no longer whether technology can solve the problems it has created, but whether it can do so without exacerbating the very crises that threaten the future of humanity. The concept of sustainability has emerged as a response to this dilemma, offering a new vision for progress, one that does not seek to dominate nature but to coexist with it. This shift represents a fundamental rethinking of what it means to advance. Sustainability is not simply about finding ways to mitigate the damage caused by industrialization, it is about reimagining what progress looks like in a world that is finite and interconnected. The challenge lies in balancing the human drive for growth with the recognition that the planet's resources are limited, and that the systems that sustain life cannot be exploited indefinitely. Can we build a future that is both technologically advanced and ecologically responsible? Can we advance as a species without destroying the very world that made our progress possible? This challenge is further compounded by the social inequalities that have been magnified by technological development. The wealth generated by technological innovation has not been equally distributed. While a small percentage of the global population has reaped the rewards of technological progress, millions of others remain mired in poverty, lack of access to education, and limited opportunities. In this way, the promise of progress has been marred by an ever-widening gap between the rich and the poor. The question arises, can we call ourselves truly progressive if the benefits of our advancements are so unevenly distributed? If we continue down the path of technological development without addressing these disparities, we risk creating a world where the rich and powerful can access the benefits of innovation while the majority are left behind. The stories we tell about progress must also take into account the shifting nature of human identity. As we develop technologies that allow us to enhance our physical and cognitive abilities, we face new questions about the very nature of individuality. What happens to the concept of self when our minds can be uploaded into machines, when our memories can be edited, when our bodies can be augmented or replaced entirely? The pursuit of human enhancement through genetic modification, neural interfaces, and cybernetics challenges our understanding of what it means to be human. If we can alter ourselves to the point where we are no longer recognizably human, what happens to our identity? Are we still the same individuals, or are we something entirely new? And if we become something new, do we still belong to the story of Homo sapiens, or have we crossed into the realm of the post-human? As we confront these questions, it is clear that the stories of Homo sapiens will continue to evolve in ways we can scarcely predict. The narrative of progress, once so linear and certain, is now filled with uncertainties. The possibilities for humanity are vast, but so too are the risks. The future of the human story will depend not just on the technologies we create, but on the choices we make about how we use them. Will we use our power to build a more just, sustainable, and meaningful world, or will we be blinded by the pursuit of endless growth and mastery? The answers to these questions will define the next chapter of the human story, one that is still being written with every decision we make. In this unfolding story of humanity, it becomes increasingly apparent that the very tools we have created to advance civilization may also hold the keys to our greatest challenges. The technologies that have given us the power to reshape the world, from artificial intelligence to genetic modification, are also creating complex moral dilemmas, ones that force us to confront deep questions about the nature of life, ethics, and our responsibility to each other and the planet. With the rapid pace of innovation comes the undeniable truth that the future we are building is one we cannot fully predict or control. As much as we may strive for mastery, we must also reckon with the fact that the very technologies we wield may one day exceed our understanding or our ability to govern them. It is in this paradox of progress, the simultaneous promise and peril, that humanity must navigate its next chapter. The rise of artificial intelligence is a prime example of how our creations are beginning to transcend our expectations, and even our understanding. Machines are no longer mere tools, they are evolving systems capable of learning, adapting, and, in some cases, making decisions. We have built algorithms that can predict behavior, solve complex problems, and even create art. Yet, as AI moves from a tool of human design to an independent entity in its own right, we must grapple with the implications. What happens when machines can surpass human intelligence? Will they become our allies, or will they reshape society in ways that we cannot foresee? More importantly, will we be able to maintain our humanity in a world where machines are capable of creating, thinking, and possibly even dreaming? At the heart of this technological transformation lies a profound question about the nature of consciousness itself. If we can create a machine that mimics human thought and emotion, does it become conscious? And if it does it deserve rights? This is a question that philosophers, ethicists, and technologists are grappling with today, as we approach a time when machines may be indistinguishable from humans in many ways. The boundaries between human and machine, once clear and well-defined, are becoming increasingly difficult to draw. As we unlock the secrets of the brain and develop artificial neural networks, we are beginning to blur the line between biological and artificial intelligence. The question of what it means to be alive, to be sentient, and to possess agency is being turned on its head. Equally profound are the ethical dilemmas posed by genetic engineering. For millennia, humans have been bound by the limitations of biology. Our genetics, our physical bodies, and our minds were shaped by the forces of evolution. But now, with the advent of CRISPR and other gene editing technologies, we have the power to rewrite the very code of life. We can cure genetic diseases, enhance physical abilities, and perhaps even extend human lifespan. But at what cost? In the pursuit of perfection, we risk losing the diversity that makes humanity so rich and complex. Genetic modification opens the door to a future where people can design their children to meet certain standards: intelligence, beauty, athleticism, creating a world where the very concept of what it means to be human is called into question. The implications of this are staggering. Will we create a world of genetically engineered superhumans? And what will become of those who are left behind, unable to access these technologies? Will we usher in a new era of inequality, where access to genetic enhancement is reserved for the wealthy few? The ethical questions surrounding biotechnology extend beyond the human body. The rise of genetic engineering also raises questions about our relationship with the natural world. If we can edit the genes of plants and animals, what does that mean for our stewardship of the earth? In our pursuit of progress, we have already made irreversible changes to the environment. Climate change, deforestation, and the loss of biodiversity are all the results of human intervention in natural systems. Now, with the ability to manipulate the very genetic makeup of the organisms around us, we are presented with a new set of challenges. If we begin to alter the genetics of entire species, what are the long-term consequences? Will we be able to anticipate the ripple effects of these changes, or will we, like with other forms of technological progress, find ourselves caught in a web of unintended consequences? This tension between innovation and responsibility is not new. Throughout history, humans have constantly faced the dual-edged sword of progress. The invention of the wheel, the discovery of fire, the harnessing of electricity, each of these breakthroughs came with its own set of challenges. But the scale of the challenges we face today is unlike anything humanity has ever encountered. With the advent of AI and biotechnology, we are not simply changing the way we live, we are fundamentally altering what it means to be human. As we continue to push the boundaries of what is possible, we must ask ourselves whether we are advancing toward a utopian future or a dystopian one. Are we building a world that will benefit all of humanity, or are we creating a future where only a select few will thrive? In many ways, the questions we face are existential in nature. What is the purpose of progress if it comes at the cost of our humanity? What does it mean to advance if we lose the very qualities that make us unique, our ability to dream, to feel, to connect with one another? As we grapple with these questions, it is important to remember that progress is not simply about the accumulation of knowledge or power, it is about the stories we tell and the choices we make. The future of humanity will not be determined solely by our ability to create new technologies, it will be shaped by the values we hold dear, the ethical principles we uphold, and the way we choose to use the power we have been given. As we look to the future, we must ask ourselves not just what we can do, but what we should do. The answer to that question will shape the course of human history in ways that are still yet to be understood. As humanity continues to journey through an era of unprecedented change, one of the most pressing questions we face is whether we are truly in control of the narrative we are creating for ourselves. The very technologies that have allowed us to master the world around us are now being applied to rewrite the script of human existence itself. Yet, despite the vast promise that these advancements hold, there is a growing sense that we are increasingly disconnected from the very essence of what it means to be human. As artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and cybernetics reshape the possibilities of the future, it becomes clear that humanity stands at a crossroads, a moment in history where the direction we choose will determine the trajectory of our species for centuries to come. The rapid pace of technological development has forced us to confront the fragility of human identity in ways we never anticipated. For much of our history, our identity as Homo sapiens has been rooted in our biology, our physical bodies, our instincts, our minds. But with each new breakthrough, we find that the boundaries of human experience are becoming more porous. Artificial intelligence, which once seemed like the stuff of science fiction, is now a reality that is deeply integrated into our daily lives. From self-driving cars to smart assistants, AI is already changing the way we live, work, and think. Yet, as we build machines that can think, learn, and adapt, we are left wondering, what happens when the creations of our own minds begin to surpass our own abilities? Will machines become our equals, our partners, or something entirely different? And if they do, what does that mean for the future of human identity? Can we still define ourselves as human in a world where our creations are capable of mimicking, and even enhancing, the very qualities that make us unique? At the same time, the rise of genetic engineering has introduced an entirely new set of possibilities, and ethical dilemmas. The ability to edit the human genome, to cure genetic diseases, and even to enhance human traits, has the potential to reshape what it means to be human. Imagine a future where parents can select the genes of their children, choosing traits like intelligence, strength, or even physical appearance. This technology holds the promise of eradicating debilitating diseases and enhancing human potential in ways that were once unthinkable. But with this power comes an ethical responsibility. If we begin to edit the human genome, where do we draw the line? What happens when the quest for perfection leads us to erase the very diversity that makes humanity so rich and interesting? And perhaps most troubling of all, what happens when genetic enhancements become a luxury available only to the wealthy, further entrenching inequality in society? These concerns about the ethics of genetic engineering extend beyond human beings themselves and into the natural world. As we gain the ability to alter the genetic makeup of plants, animals, and even entire ecosystems, we are faced with the question of how far we should go in our attempts to control the natural world. The rise of genetically modified organisms, GMOs, has already sparked debate about the long-term consequences of tampering with the genetic code of life. While the potential benefits of GMOs, such as increased crop yields and resistance to pests, are undeniable, we must ask whether the risks of genetic modification outweigh the rewards. In a world where every change we make has ripple effects across ecosystems, how can we predict the unintended consequences of our actions? Can we truly understand the complexity of nature enough to manage it without destabilizing the very systems that sustain life? Alongside the ethical concerns surrounding genetic engineering, there is also a growing awareness of the environmental challenges we face. The technology that has driven much of human progress has also led to the degradation of the planet. Climate change, resource depletion, and the loss of biodiversity are all direct consequences of industrialization and technological expansion. As we push the limits of our technological capabilities, we must confront the fact that we are living in an age of ecological crisis. The question is no longer whether we can continue to progress, but whether we can do so without further harming the planet. Can we develop technologies that will allow us to live in harmony with the Earth, or are we doomed to continue down a path of self-destruction? This tension between progress and preservation is one of the most pressing challenges of the modern age. As humanity races to develop new technologies, we must also learn to be stewards of the natural world. The question of sustainability is no longer just a matter of reducing carbon emissions or conserving resources, it is about reimagining the very way we live. In a world where we have the power to create life, extend life, and even transcend our biological limits, we must ask ourselves, what is the ultimate goal of progress? Is it to conquer the natural world, or is it to live in balance with it? The story of human progress is no longer just about the conquest of nature, it is about learning how to coexist with it in a way that ensures the survival of future generations. At the heart of this narrative is a profound philosophical question: what is the meaning of human existence in a world where the boundaries of life, identity, and technology are constantly shifting? If we can enhance our bodies, upload our consciousness, and live forever in digital form, what becomes of the human spirit? Is our humanity defined by our biology, or is it something deeper, something that transcends the physical body? These are the questions that will shape the future of Homo sapiens as we continue to evolve, both as individuals and as a species. The answers, perhaps, are not yet clear. But what is certain is that the choices we make in the coming decades will determine the course of our story for generations to come. The future of humanity is being written in real time, and it is up to us to decide what kind of story we want it to be. As humanity ventures deeper into the complexities of technological advancement, there is an underlying tension between our progress and our understanding of the consequences. In our pursuit of knowledge, control, and mastery over the natural world, we are beginning to realize that the very innovations we celebrate may carry unintended, far-reaching consequences. The rise of artificial intelligence, genetic modification, and new biotechnologies has introduced a paradox. The tools we have created to empower humanity may, in time, threaten the very things that make us human. These technologies hold the power to extend life, enhance our bodies, and reshape society in profound ways. Yet, with every breakthrough comes a new set of ethical, philosophical, and existential questions, ones that cannot be answered simply with technological innovation alone. What happens when humanity's ambitions surpass its ability to fully comprehend or govern the world it has created? Artificial intelligence stands as one of the most visible and profound examples of this dilemma. At first, AI was seen as a tool, a way to enhance human capabilities and automate repetitive tasks. But as the technology evolves, we are seeing a shift. AI is no longer merely a tool of human design. It is becoming an entity capable of self-learning, adapting, and even making decisions on its own. We now face a situation where AI, in some fields, is outpacing human intelligence. Machines can now analyze vast datasets in seconds, recognize patterns that humans cannot, and even make predictions with greater accuracy than any human could. With each passing year, AI continues to develop, and its potential seems limitless. But as AI grows smarter, it also becomes more difficult to control. If these systems begin to develop autonomy, they could make decisions that are at odds with human values. Are we ready to live in a world where machines have the capacity to shape our future, to decide our fate? And if they do, will they see humanity as a partner, a resource, or even a threat? While the rise of AI forces us to confront the limits of human agency, the advent of genetic engineering presents another profound challenge to our sense of self. Genetic technologies like CRISPR have made it possible to edit the very building blocks of life, opening up possibilities once confined to science fiction. With the power to alter the human genome, we have the potential to eradicate genetic diseases, enhance physical abilities, and even extend our lifespans. In the future, we may be able to select and modify traits like intelligence, beauty, or strength. But these possibilities come with an array of ethical concerns. If we can design our children to meet certain standards, what happens to the diversity of the human experience? Will we lose the unpredictability, the imperfections, that make us who we are? And more importantly, what happens when the power to alter the human genome is concentrated in the hands of a few? Could we create a world of genetically modified, elite humans, leaving the rest of humanity behind? The ethical implications of genetic engineering are profound, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole. Can we build a future that embraces progress without sacrificing the values of equality, diversity, and freedom? These concerns extend beyond the human realm and into the natural world. The ability to manipulate the genetic code of plants and animals raises similar questions about the boundaries between human control and natural systems. What happens when we alter the genetics of species to suit our needs? The creation of genetically modified crops and animals has already sparked heated debates about safety, biodiversity, and environmental impact. As we push the boundaries of genetic engineering in agriculture and animal husbandry, we must ask ourselves, are we truly capable of understanding the long-term effects of our interventions? When we genetically modify organisms to thrive in a particular environment, what happens when that environment changes? How do we anticipate the ripple effects of tampering with the genetic foundations of life itself? As the lines between human and non-human life become increasingly blurred, we must also ask ourselves what it means to be stewards of the planet. Can we responsibly manage our power to alter life, or are we rushing headlong into a future where our understanding is far outpaced by our ability to act? These challenges are not simply technological or scientific, they are profoundly human. They force us to grapple with questions about the essence of our existence, our responsibility to each other, and our relationship with the natural world. If we are capable of reshaping ourselves and the world around us, what do we lose in the process? As we extend our lives, enhance our bodies, and merge with machines, we must ask, what does it mean to be human? The human experience, for all its beauty and complexity, is defined by its fragility, its imperfection, and its transience. If we remove those elements, if we enhance ourselves beyond recognition, what happens to the story we have told for thousands of years? Is it still our story, or has it become something else entirely? The promise of progress is compelling, but so too is the need for reflection. As we look toward a future shaped by technology, we must ask ourselves whether we are advancing toward a utopia, or whether we are sacrificing the very qualities that make life worth living. The rapid pace of change has left us with little time to ponder the consequences of our actions. The technologies we create will not be neutral, they will shape the course of human history in ways that we cannot fully predict. Will we use our knowledge and power wisely, or will we become so enamored with the possibilities of the future that we lose sight of the values that have defined us for millennia? As we face these existential questions, it becomes clear that humanity's greatest challenge lies not in the technology we develop, but in the choices we make about how to use it. We stand at a crossroads, one where the future of our species will be determined not just by our technological innovations, but by our willingness to confront the ethical, moral, and philosophical dilemmas that accompany them. The future of humanity is not written in the stars, it is written in the decisions we make today. What kind of future do we want to create? That is the question that will shape the course of our species for generations to come. As humanity hurtles forward in an age of technological innovation, it is impossible to ignore the growing sense that we are standing on the edge of something monumental. The questions we face today are not simply about how to advance as a species, but about whether we are prepared for the profound transformations that our innovations are set to bring. The technologies we have created, from artificial intelligence to biotechnology, have opened doors to possibilities once confined to the realm of science fiction. Yet, as these technologies evolve and integrate more deeply into our lives, they also challenge the very fabric of what it means to be human. What happens when our creations outgrow their roles as tools and become integral parts of our identity and existence? Will we remain masters of our creations, or will they redefine us in ways we cannot anticipate? At the heart of this transformation lies artificial intelligence. Once a distant dream of science fiction, AI is now a powerful force that shapes everything from the way we work to the way we interact with one another. Machine learning algorithms power everything from search engines to social media feeds, influencing the way we make decisions, form opinions, and even experience the world. The promise of AI is immense: autonomous vehicles, life-saving medical diagnoses, advanced scientific research, but it is not without its risks. As AI grows more sophisticated, the line between human and machine intelligence becomes increasingly blurred. Machines are no longer merely programmed to follow orders, they can now learn, adapt, and even make decisions based on data and patterns. This evolution raises a profound question: at what point do these machines cease to be tools and become agents in their own right? If AI can learn, think, and make decisions independently, what does that mean for human autonomy? Are we ready for a world where our decisions and behaviors are influenced by machines that understand us better than we understand ourselves? This question is particularly pressing in a world where AI is being applied to every facet of human life, from finance and healthcare to entertainment and education. Algorithms are already making decisions about everything from who gets hired for a job to who gets a loan. As these systems become more complex and capable, the potential for bias and unintended consequences increases. AI is not neutral, it is shaped by the data it learns from, and that data is inherently biased. If we are not careful, AI could reinforce the inequalities and prejudices that already exist in society. As we become more reliant on these technologies, we must ask ourselves, can we trust machines to make decisions that are in our best interest, or will they perpetuate the very systems of oppression and inequality we are trying to overcome? Alongside AI, biotechnology is another realm where humanity is playing God in unprecedented ways. With technologies like CRISPR, we now have the ability to alter the very code of life itself. Genetic engineering holds the promise of curing diseases, eliminating genetic disorders, and even enhancing human abilities. But this power also carries with it immense ethical responsibility. The ability to edit the human genome raises difficult questions about the nature of life, identity, and what it means to be human. If we can select the traits of our children, what happens to the diversity of humanity? If genetic enhancements become available only to the wealthy, will we create a new class divide, where the rich live longer, healthier lives while the poor are left behind? And if we begin to alter the genetic makeup of plants, animals, and ecosystems, what are the long-term consequences for the balance of life on Earth? As we look to the future, it is clear that the pace of technological advancement is outstripping our ability to fully understand and manage its implications. The promise of a better world, one where disease is eradicated, where our minds and bodies are enhanced, where machines serve us, is tantalizing. But it also raises the question, at what cost? Are we willing to sacrifice our humanity in pursuit of perfection? Is the desire to transcend our biological limitations worth the potential risks of creating a world that is more artificial, more divided, and more detached from the natural world? The tension between progress and preservation is at the heart of this dilemma. As we push the boundaries of what is possible, we must also ask ourselves whether we are losing touch with the very things that make us human. The rise of artificial intelligence and biotechnology challenges our understanding of what it means to be alive, to be conscious, to be unique. As machines become more capable and our bodies more malleable, the line between the natural and the artificial becomes increasingly difficult to define. What does it mean to live in a world where we can enhance, alter, or even erase our physical and mental limitations? If we can manipulate our genes and augment our minds, do we lose something essential in the process? What happens to our sense of self, our identity, when the very things that make us who we are, the limitations of our bodies, the fleeting nature of life, are no longer fixed? This tension is not just about technology, it is about the human spirit itself. The stories we tell about our own progress, our triumphs, our struggles, our dreams, are inextricably linked to our understanding of our limitations. We have always defined ourselves in opposition to the world around us, whether through the mastery of fire, the construction of cities, or the exploration of the cosmos. But as we move toward a future where our limits are no longer fixed, we must ask ourselves, what do we lose in the process? What happens when we no longer have to fight for survival, when our bodies no longer age, when our minds are no longer constrained by the limits of biology? In many ways, the more we seek to control and perfect the world around us, the more we risk losing touch with the very essence of what it means to be human. The future of humanity is a story that is still being written. With each new breakthrough, each new advancement, we move closer to a future that is simultaneously exciting and uncertain. The promise of technology is immense, but so too are the risks. As we continue down this path, we must ask ourselves not just what we can do, but what we should do. What kind of world do we want to create, and what kind of future do we want to build for generations to come? The answers to these questions will shape the next chapter of human history, and it is up to us to decide what kind of legacy we will leave behind. As we stand on the threshold of a future defined by technology, there is an undeniable sense that the story of humanity is reaching a pivotal point, one that is both exhilarating and disorienting. We are living in an age where the rapid pace of change has made it increasingly difficult to predict what tomorrow will bring. Every day, new breakthroughs emerge that promise to transform our lives in ways both profound and unsettling. From the rise of artificial intelligence to the advent of genetic engineering, the future we are building is one that challenges our traditional notions of what it means to be human. Yet, as we venture further into this unknown territory, we must confront a fundamental question: what is the true cost of our progress? The power of technology to enhance human life is undeniable. Artificial intelligence, for example, has the potential to revolutionize every aspect of society, from healthcare and education to transportation and entertainment. With AI systems capable of analyzing vast amounts of data, diagnosing diseases with unprecedented accuracy, and even predicting future trends, the possibilities seem endless. But as we entrust more of our decisions to machines, we must ask, are we losing something essential in the process? The more we rely on AI, the more we risk diminishing our own agency. As machines become smarter and more autonomous, the line between human and machine becomes increasingly blurred. At what point do we stop being the masters of our creations and begin to serve them? This question is especially pressing in a world where AI is no longer confined to the realm of science fiction but is an integral part of our everyday lives. From self-driving cars to personalized algorithms that determine what we see on social media, AI is shaping our world in ways we cannot always see or understand. And while the potential benefits of AI are enormous, there are also significant risks. One of the most pressing concerns is the possibility of bias in AI systems. These systems are only as good as the data they are trained on, and if that data reflects the biases and prejudices of society, the machines will inevitably perpetuate them. In a world where AI is increasingly responsible for making decisions about hiring, law enforcement, and even healthcare, the stakes are high. If we fail to address these biases, we could be reinforcing systems of inequality that are already deeply ingrained in our society. While AI presents one set of challenges, biotechnology and genetic engineering raise an entirely different set of questions about the boundaries of human life. The ability to edit genes, create synthetic organisms, and even potentially extend human life introduces a host of ethical dilemmas. Genetic engineering, in particular, has the potential to eradicate some of the most debilitating diseases and disorders known to humanity. Imagine a world where genetic conditions like cystic fibrosis or muscular dystrophy are things of the past. For many, this vision represents the pinnacle of human achievement. But with this power comes the temptation to go further, to not only eliminate disease but to enhance human traits. As the technology advances, we may soon be able to choose the intelligence, physical appearance, and abilities of our children. But what happens when genetic engineering is no longer about healing but about perfecting? What happens when the pursuit of genetic perfection leads to a world where only the wealthy can afford to enhance their children? Will we create a new class divide, where those with access to genetic enhancements are able to achieve even greater success, leaving others behind? Beyond the social implications, genetic engineering also raises profound philosophical questions. If we can edit our genes to eliminate disease and enhance our bodies, what does it mean to be human? For centuries, our identity as Homo Sapiens has been rooted in the knowledge that we are born with limitations. Our mortality, our physical imperfections, and our vulnerability are central to the human experience. But if we begin to transcend those limitations, if we can rewrite our genetic code, what happens to our sense of self? What does it mean to be human when we no longer share the same biological constraints that have defined our species for millennia? These questions are not just abstract concerns, they are becoming increasingly relevant as we move toward a future where genetic engineering is no longer a theoretical possibility but a reality. The rapid pace of scientific discovery means that we may soon have the ability to alter the course of human evolution itself. And as we gain this power, we must ask, are we prepared for the consequences? Are we ready to live in a world where life is no longer dictated by the randomness of evolution, but by human choice? The consequences of these technologies are not confined to the individual level, they have the potential to reshape entire societies. As we gain the ability to manipulate the very fabric of life, we must consider the impact on the environment. The ability to genetically modify plants and animals raises important questions about the future of biodiversity. If we can create new species, alter ecosystems, and modify entire food chains, what happens to the delicate balance of life on Earth? The more we interfere with the natural world, the greater the risk of unintended consequences. We may find that our desire to improve the world leads to irreversible damage to the ecosystems that sustain life. In addition to the environmental and ethical concerns, there is also the question of what happens when technology begins to redefine the very meaning of life and death. The dream of immortality has long been a driving force behind human progress, and with advances in biotechnology and artificial intelligence, we are closer than ever to making that dream a reality. But immortality, like any form of progress, comes with a price. If we can extend life indefinitely, what happens to the meaning of existence? The impermanence of life, the knowledge that our time is limited, is what gives life its urgency and its value. If we remove death from the equation, do we risk losing the very essence of what it means to be alive? The future of humanity is a story that is still being written. Each new technological breakthrough adds a new chapter, full of promise and uncertainty. As we navigate this brave new world, we must ask ourselves not just what we can achieve, but what we should. The choices we make today will shape the world we leave behind for future generations, and it is up to us to decide what kind of legacy we want to create. Will we use our knowledge and power wisely, or will we lose ourselves in the pursuit of progress? The answers to these questions will define the future of Homo sapiens and the course of human history. As we approach the final chapters of our story, it is essential to pause and reflect on the journey we have taken, both as individuals and as a species. The future that once seemed distant and abstract is now upon us, and the possibilities it holds are both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Technology has given us the power to transform our world in ways that were once unimaginable, from the creation of artificial intelligence to the manipulation of life itself through genetic engineering. Yet, with each new breakthrough, we are forced to confront the profound implications of our actions. The more we gain control over the forces of nature, the more we realize how little we truly understand about the delicate balance of life and the human spirit. We are entering an era where our mastery over the natural world is no longer limited to tools and machines, it extends to the very fabric of existence. Artificial intelligence, once a mere figment of imagination, is now embedded in the core of our daily lives, from the algorithms that dictate what we see and buy to the self-driving cars that transport us from place to place. But AI is not just a tool, it is evolving into a partner, a force capable of shaping the course of human history. It has the potential to revolutionize industries, solve complex problems, and unlock new realms of creativity. Yet, as AI becomes more advanced, it also raises a fundamental question about human agency. As machines learn, adapt, and make decisions on their own, the line between human and machine intelligence becomes increasingly difficult to define. How do we maintain our autonomy when our creations can think, reason, and act independently? This question is not merely theoretical, it is one we are already grappling with in real time. As AI continues to advance, its applications grow more ubiquitous, influencing everything from healthcare and education to entertainment and warfare. With the potential to analyze vast amounts of data and identify patterns beyond human comprehension, AI is poised to revolutionize the way we live. But as we hand over more of our decision-making to machines, we must ask ourselves, are we ceding too much control? If we allow algorithms to govern our lives, what happens to our freedom to choose? The rise of AI raises not only technical and philosophical questions but ethical ones as well. Can we trust machines to make decisions in our best interest, or will they prioritize efficiency over compassion? And when AI surpasses human intelligence, who will be responsible for its actions? Parallel to the rise of AI, the field of biotechnology has unlocked new frontiers in the human experience. Through genetic engineering, we have the ability to alter the building blocks of life, to cure diseases, and to enhance the human body in ways that were once thought to be the stuff of myth. With technologies like CRISPR, we now have the power to edit the human genome, to eradicate genetic disorders, and even to design future generations with specific traits. The promise of these advancements is undeniable, diseases could be wiped out, and lives could be extended. But with this power comes an overwhelming responsibility. If we can modify our genetic makeup, what happens to the unpredictability and diversity that are fundamental to life on Earth? If we begin to engineer humans for specific traits, will we lose the richness of individuality that makes humanity so unique? The ethical dilemmas of genetic engineering are profound. As we gain the ability to shape human life in unprecedented ways, we must ask ourselves, where do we draw the line? If we can select for intelligence, beauty, and strength, what becomes of those who do not meet these engineered ideals? Will genetic modification deepen the divides in society, creating a world where only the privileged few can afford enhancements while the rest are left behind? These questions force us to confront not only the technical challenges of genetic engineering but the moral implications of playing God with the human genome. If we alter life itself, do we risk losing the essence of what it means to be human? At the same time, the manipulation of life through biotechnology extends beyond humans. We now have the ability to alter the genetic makeup of plants, animals, and ecosystems, creating genetically modified organisms that can thrive in environments once inhospitable to them. The potential benefits of these technologies, such as increased food production and resistance to climate change, are immense. But as we alter the very DNA of the natural world, we must ask, what are the long-term consequences? What happens when we create life forms that are not found in nature, and what impact do they have on ecosystems that have evolved over millions of years? The power to modify life carries with it a responsibility to understand the full scope of our actions. We cannot predict the consequences of every modification, and the risk of unintended harm is ever present. As we look to the future, it becomes clear that the greatest challenge humanity faces is not just technological, it is existential. The technologies we create are changing the very essence of what it means to be human. We are no longer limited by the biological constraints that have defined us for millennia. We can live longer, enhance our abilities, and even transcend our physical bodies. But in doing so, we must ask, what are we losing in the process? The human experience is defined by its limitations, its struggles, and its fleeting nature. As we move toward a future where death is no longer inevitable and human nature is no longer fixed, we must confront the possibility that we may lose the very things that make life worth living, the urgency of time, the beauty of imperfection, and the richness of diversity. The questions that arise from these advancements are not easily answered. They force us to confront the deepest aspects of our existence, our identity, our values, and our place in the world. As we continue to push the boundaries of what is possible, we must ask ourselves, what kind of world do we want to create? What kind of legacy do we want to leave for future generations? The answers to these questions will shape the course of human history, and they are questions that we must begin to address now, before the future is upon us. As we stand at the precipice of an uncertain future, the story of Homo sapiens is far from over. We have achieved what once seemed impossible, mastering technology in ways that are reshaping our very existence. Yet, the journey ahead is filled with questions we have yet to fully answer. The choices we make in the coming decades will determine the kind of world we leave behind. Will we use the immense power of our technologies to elevate humanity, or will we let them drive us toward a future where we lose sight of what makes us human? In our pursuit of progress, we must never forget the wisdom that has guided us throughout history, the importance of compassion, connection, and humility. The future is ours to shape, but it is only by grounding ourselves in these values that we can ensure a future where humanity thrives, not just survives.